Coming up on this week's Redcast.
You seem to be overzealous in your surveillance of employees. They are going to walk out the door because they're not addressing these issues. They're not having the conversations. And I've long thought that firms, for some reason, don't want to recalibrate their culture to deal with misconduct.
Compliance just are massively overworked, quite siloed, and have a lot of systems, and it's always a moving target. I think without technology, their job is just impossible. The ability to quickly investigate and conclude defensively is going to become critical. I think that whole journey of, reducing the false positives, great. Now we're finding more interesting stuff. I can't be doing interviews. I can't be walking the floor. And I've got to be able to quickly conclude, is this a risk or not?
It is too hard. If the game is, let's pull every bit of hay out and touch it, make sure it's not a needle, the humanity is lost. It comes back to, better policy, better staff engagement, broader data sets, broader perspectives on what's in work and what's out of work, and then a deeper learning and mindset. How are we actually going to start creating a feedback loop here that gets compliance in the loop in the right kind of way and actually supports the business and risk objectives.
Welcome to Redcast.
Shining a light on challenges and opportunities for digital compliance. Hello and welcome to Redcast. This is PJ DiGianmarino, CEO and founder of JDBG. And we're back here today to talk about what good surveillance looks like in 2022. We have had a whole plethora of expectations forced upon us from the return back to a physical hybrid work environment, but it all really gets back to digital and what are we allowed to do on the new infrastructure. Two big cases have really piqued everyone's interest. In September, we had MassMutual fined $4 million for a failure to spot their roaring kitty. I'm sure we'll hear more about that from our guests in a minute. But then in December, there was over $125 million penalty that was given to JP Morgan for failures in communications on their personal devices and such. And every day there's a new question that people in surveillance are coming up with. It's, do we have to consider that? Is this input now that we have to start taking into our perimeter? Firms are rethinking the breadth and depth of these programs, and they're looking at the amount of data that they've got to get into their environments. Think about the number of machines they're spreading across and looking at the anomalies across a whole variety of surveillance sources, which sounds simple enough, but that's just the technical side. There are a whole bunch of serious policy issues in this space around, is it legal? Is it ethical? Is it the right culture to be creating in finance? And here today, we have a couple of experts to talk about what it really looks like to them this year. Rachel, just quickly, thank you for coming back on to talk about surveillance. Can you quickly introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Rachel Wolcott. I'm a senior editor at Thomson Reuters Regulatory Intelligence based here in the UK.
Thank you. And Eddie.
So thank you, PJ, and good to meet you, Rachel. So my name is Eddie Cogan. I'm the founder and former CEO of Catellus. Catellus was and still is an e-com surveillance technology, uses machine learning, advanced behavioral analytics to really help firms control and go after the kind of risks they care about. So we were acquired by ACA back in the summer of last year. So we're now part of their technology stack. So I've been in surveillance technology for 20 years. So I'll premise, I'm always coming at things from a technologist perspective. But now that we're with ACA, we have a lot of people in compliance who are giving us that compliance and regulatory layer over what we have. So very much looking forward to the discussion today and see where it takes us.
Thanks. Well, where I'd like to start you guys both is what this means to conduct policies, right? There's a lot of expectations about what happens when you're in an office. But now we're talking about something much broader than that in a digital age, and it really then transcends even the relationship one has with the client or the market, and how one thinks about influencing a whole number of things. So, Rachel, what's the firm's employee relationship really all about now?
Well, it should be all about trust, and it should be that employees have been given the tools and the training to go about their work in a compliant way, and that they know the boundaries and the parameters. So people should know, for example, that they shouldn't be using personal devices to talk to clients when they're trading or when they're selling products involved in sales calls. Employees should know that they shouldn't be going off on a neo broker platform and setting themselves up as a trade influencer and having themselves out there as getting commissions from these platforms that allow their customers to copy other traders' trades. They shouldn't, and remembering the Roaring Kitty case, they shouldn't be posting 10 days worth of content on YouTube talking about crazy stuff to trade. But I guess the question for firms is how do you go about controlling this in an even-handed way that isn't over the top in terms of being oppressive and breaking the workplace trust. And I think that all comes down to culture and expectations. We've had a really interesting case recently here in the UK where the Metropolitan Police have had a problem with serving officers posting inappropriate things on WhatsApp groups, and people have been fired on the back of that. And one of the ideas was that they were going to have spot checks on officers' phones, see if they were saying anything sexist and racist in the WhatsApp groups. And obviously, that's a crazy idea. I guess you could do it. The problem is the culture. The problem is tone from the top, the expectations about behavior. And I think that if we're going to go forward in this new world, we've got to realize two things. One, that we have to improve our culture and improve how we're treating people and being clear about what they can and can't do and what the potential fallout from any misconduct might be. But at the same time, employees need to realize that they need to play by the rules as well. So
it's a trust, but it's a trust them so far and verify.
Well, so if you're a trader or a salesperson, by law, so that's a legal basis, you have to submit yourself to having your comms surveilled. And during the pandemic, that's increasingly broadened out to Zoom calls and whatnot. I think part of the trust has got to be that firms are showing that they have a really good understanding of what the rules are and what they can and can't do around surveillance, what's too far. For example, are you recording every keystroke? Are you doing automated facial recognition through your work laptop camera? Are you this is something that some firms have done. That is borderline illegal in the UK. And when I've spoken to people in Switzerland, for example, they say you can't do that. And sometimes when people get this surveillance technology, they just push it too far. And in fact, there was something in Bloomberg the other week where some compliance officers at Paribas use their surveillance system to check out how much, the bosses all got paid. So
Well,
you got, everything's going to have some boundaries and some limits, and think about what you're trying to achieve. I mean, are you trying to control every aspect of your employee's life, or are you trying to make sure that you're complying with the rules and regs? And I think that people need to understand that the rules and regs say you need to record and keep records of what people are doing. It's not a stalker's charter.
Let me drag Eddie in here, not necessarily on that on being a stalker, but the whole notion now is that there's a lot more stuff that crosses silos. In the good old days, it all lived in one risk silo, and you could manage it, whether it was e-com, or whether it was voice, or whether it was conference room. The twain didn't really meet, and you couldn't break down those barriers, and you couldn't then therefore have the right person or the wrong person listening in and trying to draw some inferences from that. But how has this whole environment now evolved? And how do people spot bad behaviors today, and how do they control people that they don't want spotting things from getting into the data?
Yeah, I mean, I think Rachel raises some interesting points. I think we're currently in the world where it's trust but verify. And I think there are regulations in place, and if you think about it from the firm's perspective, they have clear regulatory rules of the game that they have to make sure that they abide by. For example, they need to make sure that in the retail side, or when you're selling things to certain people, there are rules about what you can and cannot say. There is, there are information barriers, so that, there's a fairness in the market. So all these rules that we have in place, there are underpinnings, and they all became about because something bad happened. And I think one of the things that's fascinated me over the last 20 years, I've met many of the people who did the bad things that got people into the press. And I asked them, so tell me your story. And they said, I was doing this. I was doing my job. I knew about these rules, but they were in the back of my mind. I ticked all the boxes. I'd been on the training, and I wish someone had stopped me earlier, because I just got ahead of myself and I got in too far. I couldn't back out, or I didn't quite realize, or I wasn't clear, or I didn't think. And a lot of the cases, if you think about the evolution, like PJ, you're talking about the technology, and you think about what Rachel said, just a firm must protect itself because there are rules. It must protect its reputation because otherwise it will lose business. So there's that immovable object that must be there. So the question then is, how do you implement it? And we started 20 years ago, let's say, with some keywords, and we try to find the smoking guns. And now we've evolved tremendously, where we're using technology that is sufficiently nuanced, where we can remove the false positives, and we can actually define risk in an increasingly granular way, where we can begin to find behaviors and actions that are leading indicators of risk, that find people crossing the line. Like, for example, you have a self-driving car. You want to know when it crosses the line. Your Tesla crosses the line, it goes beep, beep, beep. You don't want to find out when you're on the pavement and there are a bunch of bodies wrapped around your car. So the technology is advanced to the point now where it's increasingly possible to find these early indicators of risk and have training moments. Now, maybe Rachel might say that, aren't we now being a bit big brothery? Because obviously the next step beyond that is maybe we can begin to, if we're providing training moments, are we eventually getting to the point where we can predict? And I'm not saying predict like Minority Report, but where there is an increasing possibility or probability that, given what we're seeing right now, this is going to look like that in time. And you also find in Europe where they talk about conduct risk, understanding the risk of a person, understanding the risk of a group, understanding the risk of a section or a sector of the business. And these are increasing ways that technology is trying to be used in a risk-based way to prevent the problem from happening in the first place, and do so in a sufficiently efficient way where a small group of humans can make decisions. And to your point, Rachel, there are controls in these tools that would prevent me from looking from people's salary. Now, it doesn't mean that that everybody's tools are switched on to have these, but you can detect when, for example, people are. I think one of the things you mentioned also, that you think about Germany and Finland and Switzerland, what these countries often don't want is random looking at content. In other words, they want to see that you shouldn't look at content unless there is already evidence that perhaps something is happening. And that's like the risk-based approach. So I think the technology is now here where all these different things are possible. Like one of the things we did, for example, 20 years ago in the company I founded, 14 years ago, is we looked at log files. So we were looking at behaviors of people. And we could detect, for example, that over here there was risk before we ever looked at the content. And that was super valuable in countries like Germany and Finland, where they were not allowed to look at content without approval, and that approval would never be granted unless there was already evidence of something going wrong. So having technology used in ways that align to jurisdictional requirements is now possible. And I think the next couple of years will be helping firms use that tech better and mapping that tech better into the culture of companies and jurisdictions in which they work. So, I mean, maybe PJ, we can pause there, but I think that the core tech is now available and sufficiently proven where these various things are now possible. So the next question is, what gets used and how it gets used and where it gets used to fundamentally, prevent privacy invasion. In other words, you shouldn't have people randomly looking at other people's messages. There must be an underpinning of a control and a process around it. And that itself must be monitored. But also, how can you maybe prevent some of this stuff from happening in the first place so you don't have these crazy fines?
So Eddie, I find it really interesting. You started off with trust but verify,
Yeah.
and we've kind of gone down to verify some very, very detailed data, verify some specific controls about what exactly somebody is doing. So this all gets very, very invasive. And I suppose there's an argument which says, if I've got all the data and I got the right control framework over it, then that's all good. But Rachel, we know far too often that isn't the case around the data and the control framework not lining up. What are the most important rules for people to look out for in getting this right from a compliance perspective?
You mean getting surveillance right?
Getting surveillance, yeah. I mean, the AI, machine learning, data privacy.
Well, there's a lot of going on in terms of data privacy and surveillance. And obviously, like we were saying, the legal basis here would be the MiFID rules or the MAR rules or whatever rules have record keeping and reporting requirements. That you have to do that because the regulator needs to be able to see that you've been keeping track of what people are doing. It's a regulatory obligation. And you need to be looking at trading patterns and see if those patterns match with any of the ones that are set out in the market abuse regulation and other kinds of trading patterns that you might see. So I see these as trading patterns. I don't know if it's so much behaviors. From my point of view, I guess it would be behaviors in terms of who are you talking to, and when you might be at your desk, and when you might not be. I think that's sort of going to be a stretch from making any kind of real observations about what somebody's actually thinking. I think there's too many temptations to interpret the data in a biased way, especially if you're looking at it retrospectively. I go back to the culture point. If you think about what kind of pressure your employees are under to perform, what kind of person-to-person relationship exists, on the trading desk. Is the head of the desk somebody who's easy to go and talk to? So Eddie used the example of somebody who sort of gradually sees their position spinning out of control. I mean, we saw that with Kwaku Abedolo a few years ago at UBS. It was always unclear what happened to that guy, but clearly that behavior was known on the desk, and I don't know, it's just difficult to say. I mean, maybe I think like a human to human intervention would have been so much better. Trying to be like, hey, look, what's going on here? How did we get here? This is a risk management failure. And a people management failure. And I think that surveillance has got to be, sort of a good backup tool, but I don't think it should ever be a replacement for this human to human contact. I mean, even with the roaring kitty guy, didn't anybody talk to anybody in that Mass Mutual office? Didn't they go and have coffee? And
well, and that's it. That's just it, right? Reading the judgment, it was quite clear that he had disclosed an awful lot of information to people that didn't necessarily do with it what one would expect. And I think you're right to point out that this is a people management challenge, because it's never going to be something that the machines are going to solve for us. I mean, Eddie, from a senior management point of view, what really hurts here?
This is really fascinating. I think one of the things that people don't appreciate is the extraordinary level of overwork that compliance has. I mean, as soon as you think you fix something, now we have we're involved in so many meetings now, helping companies figure out the mobile capture business, the mobile surveillance, and how do you communicate to an employee that now their WhatsApp, now they have a personal WhatsApp and a business WhatsApp, and helping to communicate the controls that there is no invasion of privacy, but however, we're giving you tools to do your job, and that will be archived and stored and surveilled. So I think the amount of work on compliance is gigantic, and it's not going away. And there's tremendous cost pressures on compliance as well to keep these things down. So the only way we can really come out from under the noise, and where you will see things like failures you're talking about there, where people kind of knew, and to Rachel's point, it's easy to look back after the effect and say, that was obvious. But at the time, when each person sees a bit of information amongst the noise of their daily life, they often don't piece it together, or they don't understand the significance of what they're looking at until retrospectively looking at it later. So it's critical for technology. And I think this is going to happen as the next couple of years go by. As, for example, Rachel talked about trade, and there's an e-com, and there's mobile. As this becomes a single picture rather than multiple pictures, we will make life easier for the humans. And then, because humans are flawed and inconsistent, whereas technology tends to be repeatable and consistent, but not perfect. And it's an evolution. So I think we have to bear in mind that compliance just are massively overworked, quite siloed, and have a lot of systems, and it's always a moving target. I think without technology, their job is just impossible,
I think that's true. While you're speaking, reminded me, I saw something in the paper, maybe you remember this, PJ, an article about one of the big Swiss banks. We'll say it's one of the two. They don't buy mobile phones for their employees. You have to buy your own mobile phone, and I don't know, you can get a discount, but that's ridiculous. I mean, you can afford a mobile phone for everybody. Then you can get them all set up. I just got sent a new one from Thomson Reuters. You turn it on, They send you some instructions. It's easy, even for me. That's what firms should be doing. They can't be relying on people to set all this stuff up, set up a surveillance tool on their personal phone. God, you got to at least meet them halfway. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, given how much some of these firms pay in fines, they should just buy some mobile phones. And I do take the point that compliance is overworked, and I just got some data from the regulator here, and so during the 18-month, 2-year lockdown period, their own system sparked off, I want to say, let's say close to 130,000 alerts in that period from their market surveillance system. So I was trying to break that down by day, and since I'm too lazy to figure out how many it is in 5 days a week, let's say it was like 250 alerts in a day. So I guess some of those, you don't have to follow up, but somebody's got to look through 250 alerts a day. That is a lot.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of looking for a needle in a haystack in that regard. But
but I think that's exactly the point, right? That it is too hard. If the game is, let's pull every bit of hay out and touch it and make sure it's not a needle, humanity is lost. Right? We're never going to win that game. If the game is rather, we spotted an outlier and there was something sharp tipping up there, so we went and looked at it, and we identified it was okay, or we found something that was bad, then we're in a better place. And I think ultimately that's to me what this whole technology policy conversation comes down to is, well, how do you get that linkage between what compliance should be doing to spot the outliers and all of the data that you're having to surface for them to find those via the AI and machine learning and all the other good stuff. And so I guess let's turn this to the final statements, because we're at time. Eddie, what do you make of the biggest trade-offs that senior management have to make in this space? What's most important for 2022 in your eyes?
I mean, I think what I was shadowed without mobile capture, because of Morgan Chase, is going to be huge. And I think, whether it's bring your own device or corporate, the companies are going to need to add that content to their archive, store it, and surveil it. And I think as you look at trade risk, and then you look at various comms, whether it's mobile or it's internal, you do care about, you have to reduce the false positives, and you do now need to find things that are more interesting. And you may find have fewer alerts, but more interesting alerts now. And therefore, the ability to quickly investigate and conclude defensively is going to become critical. I think that whole journey of, reducing the false positives, great. Now we're finding more interesting stuff. I can't be doing interviews. I can't be walking the floor. I've got to be able to quickly conclude, is this a risk or not? Is this a leading indicator of a risk that's maybe more systemic that I can actually address? But also, these tools will also become better and better at finding out when people are behaving well. Because if you have a trade alert that looks like a risk, but isn't a risk, it's a false positive, you need the technology to map into that and say, no, this is what's going on. These guys are doing their job well, and conclude that defensively. Because compliance is unusual from an investigative perspective, because not only do you have to make sure you find bad stuff, but you must show what you did. It must be explainable, repeatable, defensible. So it's an extra onerous layer on top of the compliance activity. So I think this year, as you add more and more stuff like these snappy little chats now that are going to be coming in, mixed in with long emails, the burden on better tech to be used by compliance to really not drown is going to become increasingly critical. Keywords won't work when you're dealing with WhatsApp text. It's just there's no context in a text. It must be taken in the holistic view of that communications with that person, right? So I think
for you this year, it's about getting the data tuned with the AI to be able to spot the right outliers and be able to filter through the noise.
And also, I would kind of caveat the word AI. People love the AI world. I would call it more machine learning, because what that is, you have a control, you have a rule, and the software is very, very good at learning how to find breaches of that rule. AI is all about discovering what else might be out there, the anomalies. And to some extent, to Rachel's point, that's when you really don't know what it's going to find or where it's going to look. Before you go there, you must make sure that you meet all your obligations first.
Thanks very much, Eddie. This is a great final statement. Rachel, same question. How do you conclude?
I would say the companies, financial service firms in 2022 are going to be trying to get people back in the office, but they are also going to have this realization that some people are going to want to work from home and that they're going to have to deal with this hybrid environment. And I think another thing in the background is this great resignation thing that's happening. It's not just in the US, but here in the UK as well. If you seem to be overzealous in your surveillance of employees, they are going to walk out the door. So I guess this is my way of saying that you need to take this opportunity to have a meaningful look at what your company culture is. Why are your traders always spoofing and layering? Why, despite surveillance that you've had on your traders for decades, do they still think that they're going to get one over on you? It seems like even if there's surveillance, sometimes firms just let it slide for a while because they're not addressing these issues. They're not having the conversations. And I've long thought that firms, for some reason, don't want to recalibrate their culture to deal with misconduct. That there seems to be the deep dark secret of finance that, or maybe it's not even that secret, that you're not going to make a ton of money if everybody's playing nice and following the rules. People need to think about that. I'm yet to be convinced by any of these purpose and value statements, and I don't know. It's just something that it's a shame that so many years on from the great financial crisis, this is culture is the question that people don't want to really talk about in a meaningful way, and they want to send in the clones to monitor people instead.
Yeah, and I take your point. I think you've done a great job illustrating either end of the spectrum. I hear Eddie coming at this from a compliance alpha perspective, wanting to make us all understand, yes, this call be really great. I hear you coming at it from a cultural perspective. For me, this comes back to better policy, better staff engagement, broader data sets, broader perspectives on what's in work and what's out of work, and then a deeper learning and mindset. How are we actually going to start creating a feedback loop here that gets compliance in the loop in the right kind of way and actually supports the business and risk objectives. So it's a pivotal year, and there's a lot changing, and it's really great to see all this tech and compliance come together in RegTech. So without further ado, I will thank you very, very much for your perspectives in this second episode. We are moving rapidly on to the digital asset space. Look for the next one coming up soon. And if you haven't caught it yet, go see our website, because we have a fantastic conference agenda coming up on the 5th of April. Thanks very much. Talk soon.
You can download the podcast via Spotify, Apple, and Google. But also I'd encourage people to come to the JWG website, which, as hopefully you will know, is jwg-it.eu. Go to the Intelligence Hub and create your bespoke library. This is Redcast,
shining a light on challenges and opportunities for digital compliance.